All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Meseret. Welcome to the first episode of Life After Adoption podcast. Really excited to be exploring the journey of adoption in this podcast and in hopes to inspire, educate, and inform and support adoptees and the communities. For our first episode, we're going to be busting a few myths. In the first episode, I've got the wonderful Dr. Carly Reid here with me. Dr. Carly is a clinical psychologist with a private practice with a special interest in anxiety disorder, trauma, working with adoptees and other marginalised groups. Welcome.
Thank you.
She also has a background in university lecturing and clinical supervision. Carly was adopted from Korea at 4 months of age and grew up in Perth with her older sister, who is also a Korean adoptee, and younger brother. She reunited with her Korean parents and siblings in 2013 and has continued to have a regular contact with them since then, which included trying her best to manage language, distance, and educational barrier. Carly is a co-founder and vice president of the Korean Adoptees in Australia network. And Carly, is really passionate about providing support, information, and just resources for adoptees across different identification and that are on this journey. So welcome, Carly. I'm really excited that you're my first guest.
Thank you for having me today.
No worries. I just wanted to get to know you a little bit more and for our audience to get to know you.
Mm-hmm.
So how long have you been a clinical psychologist?
Too long.
Yeah.
No, I did my training. So I did my undergraduate, my honours, my masters, and my PhD. So a long time at uni.
Yeah.
But I've been a psychologist or clinical psychologist for over 10 years now, I think.
Yeah,
So.
amazing. And how, what inspired you to take that journey?
Yeah. I'm very fortunate. I knew I wanted to be a psychologist from quite a young age just because I've always been interested in people. I've always really liked people and wanted to help.
Yeah.
And then I was lucky enough to get into the course and then enjoy it as much as I thought I would, if not more. So, my job is awesome. It's a real privilege to do what I do.
What's the best part if you had to pick one?
Meeting people. I always say the best and the worst thing about my job is never knowing who's going to walk through the door and what they're going to say.
Yeah, that's so exciting.
Yes.
Yeah,
It's really cool and interesting and also can be really stressful, but I mean, that's part of the job. Like I learn from people every day, which is super cool.
Yeah, that's so cool. And also you are a Korean adoptee.
Yes.
You have a personal experience. And this struck me a lot because you've actually gone through the reunification process yourself. Tell me a bit about it, just because it's a unique one.
Yeah, it's interesting, and every adoptee is different. I'm very conscious of speaking on behalf of I can speak from my own experience, and I work with other adoptees, but adoption experiences are so diverse, and there's a lot of odd narratives out there around adoption. So I want to make it clear that I am speaking on my own behalf. I was fortunate enough to reunite with my first family.
Yeah.
And not everybody has that privilege. It's not open to everybody. But my journey, I had just started in private practice and I got a random email saying, there's a trip for Korean adoptees to go back to Korea who've never been back before. And I was like, don't have many clients. Maybe I'll just go and eat Korean food and meet some adoptees and we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
And I actually thought at that point that would be the end of my journey. I was like, cool, I'll go there. Probably won't find anything, but, like I said, Korean food and going somewhere new. So why not?
Yeah, free trip.
Yeah, exactly. But then when I got there, it ended up being the beginning of a journey. I thought I'd kind of tick that off and close it. It was never something I was like, I must reunite. It's what I need most in life.
Yeah.
So I was kind of like, I think I'd regret not looking, but I'm also not overly invested in it. I wasn't at that point. But so it opened up this whole journey of reunion and then the ongoing relationship, which was unexpected, but it's been, for the most part, I'm really glad I did it.
Like when you went on that first trip, like what kind of people did you come across? Like are they all adoptees so hoping to reunite?
Yeah.
Or is it by surprise like yourself?
Yeah, it was a mix of people.
Yeah.
Different ages from all different countries, a lot from America, some from like Denmark and, and there was another adoptee from Australia and her and I got along really well.
Aussies.
I think people found us, we were kind of kept things light
Yeah.
at times. So
Bit of humour.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, so some people were far more, yes, I definitely want to. Some people are like, let's just see what happens. So yeah, there was definitely a mix of experiences, or a mix of intentions and then a mix of experiences as well.
Yeah, amazing. I can't wait to chat about it a bit later. I've got so many questions, as you can tell. Yeah, and what do you like to do for a bit of fun or relaxation?
Honestly, I like to eat.
Yeah.
That's my favourite thing. And it's I don't need food to be necessarily fancy. I just want it to be good. I want it to be an experience. I love that it's a connection to people and the connection to culture. It helps you understand. And I just really like food. So
Amazing. I was going to say, you can find a few, foodies around.
Yes.
Perth. I definitely love
Yeah.
my food, especially the cultural ones.
yeah. And there's so
Yeah.
much variety as well, which is fantastic. We're very lucky in that sense.
Yeah, amazing. Cool. Today I'm really excited in this episode to kind of bust a few myths about adoption that people have, that adoptees come, or you just hear on TV and things like that. And the first myth is I can adopt a child who is completely free from any psychology, developmental, emotional needs. Have you heard of this myth before?
I haven't, but I can also, adoption kind of formed because people, Caucasian parents particularly, wanted to adopt children who were developmentally normal and, if they were unable to have children of their own most of the time. So I think that's like saying to any parent, though, like it's hard. There are challenges having a child with emotional, developmental issues, but you can't guarantee that your child is not going to experience that either through like being vulnerable to it through genetics and early life experiences, but because of what they go through.
Yeah, so you're like, it's understandable, but at the same time, it's kind of like, But in adoption, like with different ages and things like that, do you find, especially the emotional need is a little bit more?
Yeah, it definitely can be.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of the myths and a lot of the expectation is that as long as you love your child, then it'll all be fine.
Yeah.
And it's really important to acknowledge that adoption has a massive influence on people, some more so than others, but it is something that is a really important and determining part of someone's life journey.
Yeah.
And some people do identify that more than others. Some people attribute a lot more to it than other people. It just depends on the person. But yeah, so adoption can definitely impact on all of those outcomes.
Yeah. So what do you think of this myth? Do you think it's true?
No.
What do
I don't think there's ever guarantees. And I don't think that should be an expectation either, because having disappointed expectations is not a good start to any kind of journey.
Yeah, because I often say, like, with adoption or any other life, it's like we all start somewhere, right? Mm-hmm. It's just adoptees start in a interesting space for whatever age. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, awesome. The next myth that people have is the younger you adopt, the better. So it sucks for me because I was 14.
Well, this is where I'm going to put my clinical psychologist hat on.
Yeah.
So we talk about critical periods. So one of the most important outcomes at a very young age is forming secure attachment, ideally.
Yeah.
Which is a baby cries out and their needs are met and they learn to rely on other people, to trust in the world, connect to others, reach out for help.
Yeah.
And so there is a critical period up until around 2-ish years of age, but it remains sensitive.
Yeah.
Even if you do, though, establish a secure attachment at a young age, there's lots of things that can impact on that. So like future trauma, for example.
Yeah.
If you think, oh, the world is safe and then you're attacked, then you're probably going to develop beliefs the world is not so safe.
Yeah.
So on one hand, adopting early can be helpful in that, in that critical period, if they have a consistent supportive caregiver from a young age, that can help.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it depends for older adoptees what their earlier experiences were. They may have formed a secure attachment and have been through the cognitive, emotional, social development that actually builds up resources to help them cope better with that adoption process as well.
Yeah.
Or equally, they could have been in awful circumstances, as we know is not uncommon, unfortunately, that could have made that process a lot worse too.
Yeah. So you're saying it really depends on the early experiences wherever, whether they're adopted parents or wherever space the kid is.
Yeah,
So that's
absolutely.
like the
There's
attachment.
different considerations depending on the age at which I think a child is adopted, as to what kind of things are going to impact on those outcomes.
Yeah. I've also had this thing where they say, I guess, in a circle. Like if they're babies, they have nothing. They're like a clean slate. Why do you laugh at that?
Because there's a famous quote by Skinner, who was a big proponent of this behavioural approach.
Yeah.
And he was like something along the lines of, give me a baby and I can make them a lawyer or a thief or whatever. And it's like, it's so not true.
Yeah.
So let's just say there's a lot of evidence suggests that is not the case.
Okay. Yeah.
And babies may not have explicit memories of things. They may not be able to say, when I was a baby at this age, this happened. But that doesn't mean it didn't impact on them, that there's implicit or like there's learning that occurs at that stage. They may not be able to identify it, but it doesn't mean that it didn't impact on them.
Yeah. So you're like, it definitely depends.
Yeah.
What about that book? Have you read that book, Primal Wound?
I haven't read it, but I know
or
of
heard
it.
of it. Yeah,
Yes.
the idea that like when a kid is, in their mothers and they're separated and that trauma.
Yeah, that's not a normal process.
Yeah.
And not to say that you can't get good outcomes, because I think it's important to recognise it's a wound. It's not necessarily like a death blow.
It's like you're doomed.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's something that we probably will discuss at some point in this idea about adoptees being damaged or whatever else.
Yeah.
But anyway, going back to, it's not something that ideally would happen. Ideally, that people would likely be with because there's biological and cultural roots and connection that's already there beyond the experiences and the parenting and whatever that they can provide to that child. Yeah. There's a lot more stuff that is that can determine, their adjustment and their sense of belonging and things like that.
Yeah. So you're adopted at 4 months. Mm-hmm. Would you say that age is a factor in adoption at all? Is it something that should be considered?
I think it's something should be considered, but I think there's a lot of things that should be considered. Parents tend to want to adopt a baby, and I think for that they want to... I can understand adopting an older child can be like picking up a book halfway through and having to just run with it.
Yeah.
So I imagine that would be really difficult.
Yeah.
So having a child, obviously, from a younger age, they get to start more towards the beginning, but it is not the beginning of the book either.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to acknowledge. Yeah. But yes, there is more scope for, like, there are more critical periods and more brain sensitivity and more developmental outcomes that those parents or those influencers can impact on.
Yeah.
But even if those things are in place, they're going to realise or be told at some point that they're adopted, and then there's going to be an adjustment to that. So.
As well, yeah. I've got another question on that. Do you think they should get told younger?
I think it's helpful to always be honest and share developmentally appropriate information.
Yeah.
I think it's better to know and to be able to get support and talk about that and ask questions and have it broken to you at a certain age. I think that adjustment, because it's dishonesty.
Yeah. 100%.
And it's hard, it affects trust, and we know that trust is a massive issue with adoptees, for a lot of adoptees. So,
Many of us.
Yeah. But when I was a kid, apparently, when I was a baby, people asked my mum, are you going to tell her that she's adopted? And my mum was like, I think she'll be able to tell that she's Asian and that we're not. It's not like, recessive Asian genes that kick in every few generations.
Yeah. Suddenly it's like, where did you come from?
Well, they'd be like, does she speak English? Mum's like, she's 4 months old. She doesn't speak anything. So there were some interesting questions that she got around that.
Yeah, 4 months people expected you to kind of know.
Yes, that I have some well-formed sense of cultural identity and,
Yeah. Oh, my goodness, at 4 months, it's like, I can tell I'm different.
Be an impressive level of self-awareness.
It is. Started quite hyper-vigilant. Yeah. Oh, wow. So how does age affect each adoptee in their experiences? So, for example, like I was 13 when 13 and a half technically when I was adopted, but at 14 is when I migrated. And like you're saying with the book, like I was definitely finished, done, closed book. And my parents had to open it up and look at each section, and it was just a lot of work. Rightly so, because of the previous experiences that I've had. So, age, like, what do parents need to be aware, and how do adoptee, like, I guess, keep that in mind?
Yeah, it's tricky because it does depend on the child, and I think that is more evident of who the person is the older they are, because they formed their own sense of identity and have more ownership and understanding and memories about their own experiences.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to remember that the adults are the adults.
Yeah.
And that sounds like a very obvious statement, but what I mean by that is adults are the ones who have a responsibility. They're the ones making decisions that impact.
Yes.
And so, yeah, I absolutely have empathy with the difficulties, the challenges that I'm trying to reach out and they're a closed book and I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Totally understand that would be really hard,
Yeah.
but it is their job to keep reaching out or to figure out what supports can be provided and not just go, oh, I did this once, they rejected me, so I'm not going to try again.
Yeah.
But probably need to do their own work to deal with their own emotions. I mean, I think that's parenting in general.
Yeah.
One of the most important jobs as a parent
Yeah.
is to do what you need to do
Yeah.
to be able to be okay enough to do what your children need you to do.
Like, yeah, exactly, because you're a parent as well. And like, what do you say? Like, I really wanted to talk a bit more about doing the work and actually being emotionally present, because I think a lot of people think adoption is like a once-off event and it's done and dusted. But when the child, we know it's a lifelong journey for the child, like, how do you support them in their experience? What kind of work does the parents need to do and the child needs to do?
That is a question that doesn't have a specific answer. I think it's
Yeah.
more of a process of saying, being aware of what kind of things could happen.
Yeah.
And if they do happen, what you're going to do about it. Does that involve seeking your own support? Does it involve getting support for them? What issues are coming up? Are they to do with helping your child with their experiences of racism? Are they to do with identity, sense of belonging? Are they to do with, there could be all sorts of things. But knowing what supports are out there, what kind of things could promote positive development, having open communication, empathy and communication and understanding throughout, which means that if they are going through something, hopefully they can come and say, hey, I'm going through this, help me.
Yeah, help me. And I don't even know what's going on in me. Like, because the child is often like stuff is happening inside, but they don't necessarily have that language, right?
I would say a lot of adults are like that too.
As well.
Because, I mean, there was a very prominent behavioural approach. There's the idea that behaviours are voluntary and can be reinforced or punished, and that's how we can control behaviour. But there's so much more to why people do what they do other than just, oh, you were rewarded. People smiled at you, therefore you kept doing it. And I think that hasn't been understood by a lot of people, or it wasn't, people weren't educated on this during their own upbringing, so it can be difficult. And a lot of the time we feel how we feel. Do we know why? No. And a lot of the time what we feel may be a secondary reaction. We might feel angry when actually that's a secondary expression to feeling hurt or guilty or ashamed, or there's all sorts of layers that may remain unexplored if you don't have the opportunity and the safe place to explore them.
Yeah. I was going to say that leads me into our next myth, which is myth 3. Children who are adopted are damaged emotionally. I've heard that, being a teen adoptee, I've definitely, because there's a lot of anger and, like, literally didn't have the emotional intelligence to know what was going on. And, trauma is also, stored in our body. But it was labelled, some languages that have been used as like, oh, there's no future for you.
That's the reason I pulled that face is, one, it's not a death blow again, and two, that label is put on the adoptee. Actually, and a third point would be there's such thing as a normal and healthy reaction.
Yeah.
That
Talk to me.
Bad things happen to you.
Yeah.
You're allowed to be sad. You're allowed to be angry, and that's not problematic. That is normal and understandable. When unusual things happen, you may have unusual reactions to the general population. Yeah. But that doesn't mean it's unhealthy or that they're damaged in some way.
Yeah, because I was going to say there's this phrase that when we hear it, all adoptees like we cringe. And that is, you should be grateful. I told you.
That's that face.
Yeah, that statement around like, because it is like somehow because this event has happened, we should discount, what has happened previously, and that we should just give it up. Like, it's like a false gratitude.
Which is incredibly invalidating.
Yeah.
And this idea that we should be grateful for something that was chosen for us.
Yeah.
The adoptees are the ones who are the victims of and have the decisions made by adults, and that includes first families and adoptive families and organisations that facilitate adoption and all sorts of levels there.
Yeah.
They make the decisions because they are the adults, and yet the biggest impact is on the adoptees themselves.
Yeah.
So yes, you see this in the media. This idea about these poor little adoptees. Are adopted by these amazing selfless white families who can take them in and give them a better life, and isn't that so wonderful? And if not for them, they would be on the streets or whatever else. There's some very strange stories that go out there. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I definitely had like someone from a family member to say to me that like, imagine what would happen to you if your family didn't adopt. And it was so confronting because it's like, oh, well, actually, I didn't want to be here from the start. Thank you very much. It's like I kind of, chose this life. It's like, no, I didn't. So it's so invalidating to actually say that.
Yeah.
And like the adoptees left with that impact, like with this myth that parents, I know my mom hates it when she hears this, that she's just like a perfect person. It's like she only did one good and she can do no good, like no bad thing moving forward. And she hates it because it's like, that's what people see.
Yeah. And I also think that, there's a couple of things related to that. One, with that narrative being forced on you, there is no safe space to talk about the other stuff. People may be grateful, and that can be a valid emotion, but you can be both grateful and also experience devastating grief about what you didn't have.
Yeah.
That you didn't get to grow up in the country that, you have ancestors that go back hundreds of years with people who look like you and, but you can also be grateful for the life you have and enjoy, your adopted life in a lot of ways. So both can be true at the same time.
Yeah.
And I think that's really under-recognised, but it's not fair to say, oh, I have room for this one that I want to hear.
Yeah.
But no.
Nothing else.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing is I always say, like, when they make that statement, is I actually ask the adoptee how grateful they feel.
Yes. It's an assumption.
Yeah, it's an assumption, it's a myth, but it's like, just say, hey, what's your adoption experience? And that gives a voice, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Open questions are really helpful.
Yeah.
The other side of it that I think is important to acknowledge is that adoption for adopted parents is often a second choice.
Yeah.
That it is adoptive parents who were unable to have children of their own and they chose to adopt.
Yeah.
And so the kind of narrative that these are amazing, selfless people who are choosing to adopt these poor, orphaned children from other countries, like they're getting something out of it too. They're making that choice for a reason.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's a bad reason or we should be, blaming or shaming them.
Yeah.
The point is that it's a very one-sided, very... lovely narrative of these amazing people out there who are helping these poor little adopted.
It's like a saviour mindset, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's like we hate it so much because it's like we can see both benefits of it as well. And like that impacts children, right? Especially when they're second choice. And how you parent, that message comes through.
Yes.
And I hear it in our community a lot more.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Well. Yeah.
I think that all children get, it's a difficult one because it's like this gratitude thing. Yeah. I hear this from non-adoptive clients as well when they're like, oh, your parents say you should be grateful for this. And it's like, again, parents choose to have children. Yeah. Or they often, most of the time, choose to at least engage in the acts that result in having children. So they are the adults. Yeah. And they have choice. Yes. And so those choices result in children being born. Yeah. And so saying you should be grateful for my choices seems a bit strange when you put it like that.
Yeah, it's so interesting, the contrast between, like, you wouldn't say that to a person that's having a normal child, yet for adoptees you have this. And then on top of that, it's like, because you're angry and have other emotions as a result of lives, unexpected, then you're damaged good. So it's really interesting.
I can also say, though, being a parent, I have first-hand experience of how difficult it is and how much I do sacrifice in terms of my time, my body. I have to share my food sometimes and I really hate that.
Do you have to finish their food as well?
No, but sometimes they want the last bite of something but I'm like, but I was really looking forward to that. So I understand that it's hard, but I also know that I chose that.
Yes.
I'm like, well, this is just what you get for choosing to have children is that it requires that you give up and that you sacrifice and that it's hard at times. But I don't put that on them.
And it's ongoing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Lifelong.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. That's what you sign up for.
Yeah. Surprise. Yeah. I just wanted to talk a bit more about like what do people need to understand about trauma and adoption? Is it linked? Some people consider adoption trauma or traumatic experience.
It is a traumatic experience.
Yeah.
I think that it's important to say the difference between trauma and being traumatized.
Yeah.
So it is a traumatic experience, but there's people who are deployed overseas who don't come back with PTSD.
Yes.
So it's not to say that just because you've been through it, it has these particular impacts on you, but it can do.
Yeah.
And there's a whole lot of stuff that predicts whether somebody ends up with a trauma reaction or not, which is about the nature of the trauma. It could be their own temperament, so how reactive they are to things. It could be what support they get afterwards, what coping resources they've got.
Yeah.
A whole lot of factors.
And if it's one event or it's repetitive, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But I think, again, what you were saying with adoption is not a one-off event. There is ripples that can go throughout your whole life.
Yeah.
And things that may not be directly associated with the adoption but are a consequence of them, like racism for intercountry adoptees, transracial adoptees.
Yeah, because that one is like a really interesting one because all these experiences that we're like, how do we even start having that open conversations about racism? Because I know I get at both ends. I'm too white in my own community. And clearly, like, with my parents, like, they, two white people with 4 children. It's like the world's confused.
Yes.
So it's how do we have that open conversation of this such a unique and complex.
It's really hard because on one hand, I believe in open conversation, but on the other hand, I think it's up to adoptees to share what they want. Sometimes it's none of people's business too, and I think they should have that right to say, you know what, I don't want to have to explain this to you.
Yeah, and we have to tell our stories, right? Well, we feel like we have to tell stories because people look at you and like, doesn't match up and we're like on the spot and sometimes we don't want to share.
Yeah, and in that, and this is working with a lot of marginalised groups, you feel representative. If you're angry, they're like, oh, adoptees are angry.
Yeah, I hear
there's
that
so much pressure on like, this is what an adoptee is and I've got a responsibility to show people or educate people. Yeah. And that's their right, but not something that should be a pressure that should be put on them.
Yeah. We can talk about this for so long. Don't feel it. I wanted to like continue on that transracial, adoption, both of us are. You hear this phrase or the myth that your family doesn't see colour. So it'd be like my parents or like my extended family, like, we don't see colour in our children or in this family.
I'll start by saying I think that is well meant.
Yeah.
Especially if it's true, because if it's not true, people will pick up on that. The adoptees will pick up on that.
Yeah.
But in general, I can understand that point of view, and I think it's meant as I see you as truly being part of our family and that you're no different to me than if you're adopted or if you're my biological child. And the sentiment behind that and the true feeling behind that is lovely. I will say also that it's very easy to say that colour doesn't matter when the colour of your skin is associated with privilege and not disadvantage.
Talk to me more about that.
So, I mean, privilege, I think people have I'm going to talk about privilege a little bit because people seem to think that privilege means that I live a great life, you know, and people say, well, I don't live a great life, and therefore why are you saying I'm privileged?
Yeah.
And the analogy I often use is like everyone is running their race of life.
Yeah.
And life is hard. And you will have unique things in your lane, but privilege is about not having to leap over hurdles, systematic hurdles that other people do. You're running, but these people are having to overcome more, and there's certain groups that it's more systematic than individual, are having to overcome these hurdles which are slowing them down that you just can run past.
Like what kind of hurdles do you think for adoptees specifically?
For adoptees, some of these reactions from other people. The emotional impact can be developmental impact. There can be like physical developmental impact. If you were, my sister who's also adopted, she complains about she has a flat head at the back because being in an orphanage, you know, you get told to turn the baby's head and they may not have had as much ability to do that. And so she's very proud of her daughter's head because she's like, I turned that, now it's all round.
I rewrote that story.
But yeah, like even that kind of impact is not something you'd necessarily think about. So there could be all sorts. But racism for transracial adoptees is a big hurdle.
One. Yeah, yeah. So what, like, have you experienced it yourself?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
In what way?
Lots of ways. So, you, I'm too white or not white enough.
Yeah.
That when I used to go out with if I was at the shops with my brother,
Yeah.
who isn't adopted, they're like, isn't he a bit young for you?
Yeah.
Some of my other friends have been mistaken for mail order brides when they've gone out with their adoptive fathers.
Wow. Yes, that was me sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah. At the doctors, they look at me, they look at my dad, and they're like, what is happening here? Your daughter?
Yes. I remember once my mum, I went somewhere with my mum and to a hairdresser, and the hairdresser kept saying, oh, how's your exchange student? Over, like this was multiple times. Like,
Yeah.
And I think that colourblind perspective is problematic because it ignores the fact that if there are obvious, especially visual differences, they are going to encounter that.
Yeah.
So you can't say that you can't see it because you're saying you can't see the issues that they're likely to face, and therefore you may not do anything about them. You may not be as proactive as you need to be in helping them to navigate that.
Well, I find like a lot of it is that it's like home is safe, but the world is not.
Yeah.
So it's like if you're not acknowledging this issue.
Well, that's a privileged thing. Home may not always be safe either. So.
Yeah, yes. I'll take that back, you know. It's each to their own, but, you know.
But if home is safe, yes, even if that colourblind perspective is true in your home, that's not necessarily and very unlikely to be true in the outside world in the way that the world currently is.
Because I know like adoptees can experience racism in their like not just immediate family, but with the outer family as well. Yeah. So if your outer family is embracing you, everything is good, but then you go to work or you go on the bus or like hairdressers, and you're like, oh, this is like, what is that space? Like, how do adoptees navigate that? Not feeling like they belong, like.
And I think that's up to the support that's provided is recognising. I don't think it should be that, white parents shouldn't adopt adoptees of colour. Yeah. But it's more about if you are going to adopt a child of colour, you need to be aware of what issues could be faced. Yes. Give them, are there people, is there racial representation in your community, in the media they consume, in the children's books you're presenting? Yeah. Are issues of racism and privilege talked about in your home and elsewhere? Yeah. Are there people that you can either link them in with or in your lives who have perhaps first-hand experience of dealing with their own issues with racism, who can relate and help support that person? Yeah. Because it can be really, like I found personally, I went to a high school where there was actually a lot of Korean and other Asian people, but I didn't fit in with them either. Yeah, wow. And my first experience of truly feeling like I felt in was being around Korean Australian adoptees, because Koreans who have grown up in Australia still have Korean parents, and so they have that Korean Australian straddling of cultures, but not in the same way that I did. Did not feel 100% Australian, did not feel Korean when I went there. So it's a very specific group because of that uniqueness of that experience. I was literally going to say that because like a lot of people go, oh, you're Ethiopian. It's like, oh, there's Ethiopian migrants or Ethiopian that happened, but they live the culture and have the culture with them all the time. And I hear that from my community as well. It's like, oh, you're 14. It's like you should know your culture, you should know everything, all your siblings should. But at the end, I'm like, I'm not living it out every day. Like home culture is different to work culture, different to school culture. So it's like... And you may not have had the option to continue to engage with that culture from the age of 14. Yeah, most adoptees, I think, especially if they're in remote areas, they don't get to practice that unless the parent's very proactive in that. And I know there's a lot of parents that are on Facebook and going back home and things like that. But it is such a unique experience. And I remember when I first met, like, Lanelle and, the ICA family, it was just like, oh, my God, like, I don't have to explain myself, like other adoptees. It's such a relief and a again, place of belonging. Talking about privilege and difficulty, it is one of those, like having people around you who are biologically related to you, who may or may not be similar in personality, but there's a greater likelihood that you share temperamental characteristics, which can be a good thing or a bad thing, don't get me wrong. But, being around people who look like you or look similar to you, have relatable backgrounds and things like that is a privilege. Well, so representation really matters. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And how do you, like, I guess,
advise parents to support their young children that are interracial, like when they're hearing this myth, like what are the suggestions that you would have?
Yeah, trying to engage as much with and give them as many opportunities to engage with their culture on their terms.
Yeah.
As you can, not just doing it once and not taking them to this is some event that's going on.
Yeah.
But actually allowing that and saying, do you have any friends who, you know, like, do you regularly socially associate with people from that culture? Do you have material? And can you talk to them? Can you improve their literacy in consuming media? Can you say, yes, you're right, there isn't a lot of representation.
Yeah.
Or the representation is not helpful. There's a certain myth, a lot of Asian people are seen as what they used to call the model migrant.
Okay.
Which was, you know, oh, well, look at these. You know, they're also from a culturally diverse background, but they're hardworking and they're studious and all this, and they, you know, and so they were held up as this example to other culturally diverse groups as to this is what you should be. Or like the sexualization of Asian women.
Yes.
I really hated when people would say, I'm attracted to you because you're Asian, or in spite of the fact that you're Asian. I was like, why is this even a thing? Why are we talking about this?
Yeah, but I get that. It's like, you're pretty for a black woman. And I'm like, wow, I feel
just
so privileged.
cut that bit off at the end.
Yeah.
That would be appropriate.
Genuinely, like a genuine comment. So, you know, and even I want to bring this up because the way that parents model our culture and the way that they talk about it is so important.
Yes.
Like, I hear, like, in our community that, you know, perhaps parents hadn't not known, they either shut off or they've actually spoken poorly about it to the point where they hate their culture and they become an adult and they're confronted by it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, like really, it's really important to model and actually have that, you know, cultural connection because it's part of identity. Yeah.
But also, again, improving that literacy of even if they do model positive beliefs about the culture, that they can help them when other people don't, when that's modelled around them by other family members or people in the community, to be able to just understand where those views come from and be able to challenge them so that they're not internalised.
Yes, we internalise a lot of things and process them later. Yeah, amazing. I'm enjoying this conversation so much.
Me too.
Because we're hearing. And another one is, you know, I wanted to come back to your family reunion. And there's this myth that family reunion is a joyful time. You see it in movies. Yeah. What's your experience and what do you think about that myth?
One, reunion isn't as common as people think it is.
Yeah. Why is that?
I think because of closed adoption and a lot of practices were closed sort of in the, I think, 50s, 60s, and 70s. Yeah, quite a long time actually. Yeah. So that means that information wasn't shared, that basically that the adoptee had no right to the information about their background. Yeah. And parents couldn't be easily contacted and they weren't kept up to date about their child or anything like that. Yeah. So, yeah, that obviously made things difficult. Sorry, I've lost track of what we were talking about.
No, we were talking about like, you know, family
the happy
reunion
press,
and how like, you know, it's not quite common because of like the history of adoption, isn't it? Like there's a history of it and one of it is like the fact that parents didn't want to disclose their information and then these kids come up and grow up as an adult and like, who am I?
Yes.
Yeah.
In Korea, there's a national shame about adoption and so... And it's interesting culturally because when you go to the adoption agencies, they're often more motivated to protect the adoptive parents than help the adopted children. Yeah. Which is really problematic because, again, decisions and power and, you know, impact and things like that, which I could go further along back. So, yes, reunion isn't as common as people think. And it's not a happy story. Like, there's a lot of that you've missed out on. Again, I kind of likened meeting my first parents, my birth parents, as meeting in-laws. Yeah. I wanted to be loved and accepted by them, but they also didn't bring me up. So, like, I got to know them as an adult, which is entirely different. Yeah. Not to mention the language barrier and the cultural barrier. I had some hilarious stories of using Google Translate. Yeah, I want to hear it because I'm like, what was your actual experience? Like, were you on a plane nervous? Not really, because I didn't expect it to happen. Like, so I got there and like... So I did some searches. I went to my the agency I was adopted from. I did a police search. I literally put up posters of like a baby picture and a picture now with my information, like a lost dog, which was quite funny.
That is so funny.
So weird.
Yeah.
So I did a police search and like we'd been down the bottom of the country and we were going back up to Seoul.
Yeah.
And they said the staff that came up said, "Can you come up the front?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure."
Yeah.
Like, so we just heard from the police. They think they found your parents. They're still together. You have a brother and a sister, and they want to meet you tomorrow. I was just
Oh
like,
my goodness. So you were on this trip to see your country and culture.
Yeah.
Did not expect.
I mean, the purpose
Or
was to
open.
support adoptees to find their birth families, but I also
Yeah,
knew the
but-
reunion rate was really, like, I think it's less than 5%. It's
So-
really low.
Yeah, but you only had a day to prepare.
Yeah, so literally it was like, cool, I guess that's what's happening. So I met them. I had a translator at the time, which was helpful.
What was it like seeing them?
Really surreal. So one of the
Yeah.
first things I noticed is that me and my birth mum have the same hands.
Yeah, oh wow.
Which sounds really strange, but it was something that I noticed, and we
Yeah.
actually looked very similar.
Yeah.
So that was a weird experience for me, having grown up around white people in my
Yeah.
life.
Like you look
and-
like me.
Yeah. But also I was like, well, what do I want to get out of this? Because I'm not necessarily assuming this is going to be, again, a happy, lifelong relationship. Because there were other adoptees on the trip who were like, oh, I don't want to meet you. Like they found them and they said no.
Oh, really?
Or it was a one-off thing or, you know. So I was
Yeah.
like, I kind of want to find out my health-related information because they ask, what's your family history? I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, that question we get is like, what's your family history? And we're like,
And it
can't
is
answer
really
that.
important.
Yeah.
You know, in terms of your risks and like managing risks for
And your
physical
children
and
as
mental.
well.
Yeah, exactly.
Pass on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask about that.
Yeah.
I did want to express some gratitude, and again, I'm talking from my own perspective
course.
because,
Yeah.
you know, I was like, I wanted to say thank you for, you know, like I did feel privileged for the life that I have.
Yeah.
But that's specific to my experiences.
Yeah.
But also I probably internalised that gratitude narrative as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, just finding out like whatever they were willing to share with me, more or less. So the circumstances.
That was like, and you had a translator there.
Yes.
And how else did you I want to hear the Google Translate.
So when I went to visit my family on other occasions, there's been things like one of them they're asking, so pig's intestines are something that they eat there.
Yeah.
And but the Google Translate said, do you want to eat rectum? Probably not. And my Korean surname means something along the lines of God. And so my brother was like, from your brother, God of Iron. It's just hilarious.
Oh my goodness, you're like...
Yeah, so sometimes we just kind of look at each other and like, no, I have no idea
Are we
what that meant.
connecting?
Yeah.
Yeah, probably not. Like, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh my
but also
goodness.
it's not just the language, it's the culture.
Yeah.
It's what's shared and what's not. Like being a clinical psychologist, mental health isn't something that's overly well recognised.
Yeah.
It's quite a shameful thing, I believe, in a lot of countries actually.
Yeah.
So understanding what I do and why I think it's so important.
So you want a doctor or a lawyer? No, I had to
Exactly,
put that
yes.
down.
Me, the model
expectation.
migrant. And,
Yeah.
you know.
Going back, Mum, I'm a lawyer.
Yeah.
There's certain occupation that exists, but the rest.
But it is interesting because I think a lot of adoptees are quite perfectionistic and people pleasing and think that they have to prove themselves and be
100%.
worthy and be like, I am a doctor, I am a lawyer, look at, you know, I'm doing well and kind of have to prove themselves and not just be who they are.
And the status as well is quite accepted. And there's, I've felt it at times where it's like you're getting one chance in life, second chance in life,
Yes.
and like making the most out of it.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Not disappointing. And then when you go to your birth country and it's like, so have you made us proud?
Yeah.
And that's where, like, you know, with the reunion, I guess, wanted to talk about, it's like going to your birth country and actually you're this completely different person and like, you know, mental health, because I know that I love my birth family, but they're very much they do not understand the internal struggle. And, you know, we say like if people don't know what they don't know, then they don't know.
Yes.
But I'm having to think, I'm like, you know, you should be grateful you've done this. And I'm just like, I also struggle, and they just don't see that.
Or don't want to.
Don't want to as well, because I think affirming for them. So
Yeah.
with your family, like reuniting, like how is that? Were they like, oh, look, this is our daughter, like...
Yeah, again, I have quite an unusual story. So again, I want to make it very clear this is mine, because they said things like to me, we stayed in this town so that if you ever wanted to find us, you could.
Yeah.
That we used to watch this program that helps adoptees reunite with their families, just stay up every weekend to watch it in case you were ever on it. We never got a family photo done. So when I saw my my birth family, they had got their first family portrait. It's still hanging above their TV. So there's a lot of really lovely things. Yeah. But I still would say it's not an all positive, joyful thing. No. It was really hard. Yeah. It's exhausting.
Yeah. What were the emotions you were feeling during that day and then after?
At first, I was just like, cool, let's just see what happens. But it was actually afterwards, and it was when I returned home that I found I was really surprised by my reaction. Yeah. As someone who, I try to be self-aware and reflective, because you know that's part of my job. And I thought I had a really well-formed sense of identity, and I did, but it just threw me. I just felt like, the only way I could explain it to people, I felt like I'd been abducted by aliens, had been through all this weird random experience, and then just been put back into my old life. So I felt different, but I looked the same, and everyone expected me to be the same when I wasn't. I'd just been through this completely life-altering experience.
And how did you articulate that when you came back?
I didn't. I kind of just went, I need time. Yeah. And I just really leaned on other Korean adoptees, the people I'd met. We wrote these, I remember one of my friends, Park, who lives in the US. Yeah. We wrote each other these like 10,000-word emails every night and stuff. It was just this full, like, intense unloading because, again, that real, like, you understand and, like, we can share, although everyone has different experiences, having that kind of you needed that kind of really unique support and understanding. Over time that got better, and I was able to reconnect and explain, and I was ready to kind of share my story with others. But because I posted a bit about my reunion on social media, like, you must be so happy that you're finally whole again and that you've met your real family and all this kind of stuff. My sister in Australia got really angry. She's like, they can't replace it. So I understand her point of view. Yeah. Because it's like, that's really, really invalidating for our family.
Yeah, 100%. It's like, what are you, like, there's got to be space for both now. Yeah. And like, there's, like you were saying earlier, like, there's grief and there's joy.
It's so complex.
Both.
I think this idea that we can squeeze all people's narratives into this one story that we all want to hear is the most problematic thing. Yeah. There are a lot of contradictions, a lot of complexity that can all be held together in the same but complex, rich narrative. And that's what we need, a space to explore and explain, and that these assumptions aren't made along this very narrow track of this is what I'm expecting you to say. Yeah.
I love that. It's not one size fits all at all, and it's complicated.
No size fits anyone, apparently. So.
There's no model. And saying that, like, how would you help adoptees that are now looking at, reunion and like studying that journey or on it, like looking back? What did you wish you had?
I don't think you can prepare because you just have no idea what that's going to look like. But I think in general, having supports available, having people you can connect to, talk to, being willing to seek help, being aware of professional and, less formal, like people in your support networks, cultural supports. I think some education, but not necessarily leaning on any one outcome too much, but being aware of what is possible, having an idea about what that could look like, and trying to, I think in life in general, having no expectations is the most adaptive way of doing things, but is impossible. But trying to keep an open mind and trying not to invest too much in any particular expectation.
Because I think with the reunion, you can kind of go, oh, this is going to solve my whole like,
I'm going to be resolved and I'm going to be happy and feel a sense of belonging and my family's going to welcome me back with open arms, but my adoptive family will also be really supportive and everyone will be happy and live happily ever after.
Which is not the case.
That would be lovely.
In movies that are scripted.
Exactly.
Oh my goodness, like it's really you can go on and on about this because it's so important.
Again, rich narratives.
Really rich narrative, and it's only through narratives that we can actually be so much more understanding and compassionate. And like for me, like the reunion of being an older adoptee, I've always been connected. I had my phone numbers and my parents were quite supportive, so it was easy transition, but I did lose language and culture because I was just like, I'm the same. Oh no, I'm not Ethiopian enough.
And that loss needs to be acknowledged.
And I think that the grief, isn't it? I really wanted to talk about the grief that comes with all these myths that are dismissed, to be honest, and not acknowledged. Like, Is it real?
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
grief is something that, again, people can assume is a one-off event.
Yeah.
When people come into my work and say, oh, I went through this grief, but I thought I was over it. I thought I processed it. It's like, you did, but that doesn't mean it's not going to come up again.
Yeah.
Like, grief is something, the analogy I often use is you may have been a bun and then grief happens and now you've just got to learn to live life as a donut. There's a hole there that you've got to live with. It's not going to cover over.
Yeah.
It might get less raw over time, but it's going to be there.
Yeah, it really is.
yeah.
It's like, it's important. It's just not going to go away. There's certain emotions or certain things I wish I can not live without, but that's not the case. But you can have support and you can thrive.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, you can there's still opportunity in spite of it or with it, but you can't say, oh, I'm just going to ignore that and assume that it's not going to have an influence.
Yeah.
And it has a place, and it's an important place too.
Yeah, and it comes at different stages. In my own experience, I've noticed there's like certain things I grieve on point, and then there's certain things, and I also love the freedom of being in between.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I can make up my rules, but it's something that's in the journey. So yeah, it's like we've covered a lot today, lots of different topics, and myths that are obviously untrue and that are circulating. I hope it's been informative, but I just wanted to ask Carly, like, what's one message that you want to leave with our listeners and our community from today's chat in a nutshell? I know it's really hard.
I think trying to be aware of and challenge your own expectations and assumptions around adoption in general, recognising it is complex, controversial, individual, and be open to that and be able to be responsive to that rather than the ideas in your head. Yeah.
It's like covered it all. I love that so much. It's all about it. And I know that you are doing you've got your own practice. Tell us a little bit more, because I think after this might bring up a few things, and I want to, make sure adoptees and their families can actually get support after.
Yeah, it's hard to find support because there are a lot of practitioners who have experienced an attachment or trauma, but there are some quite specific and unique issues related to adoption, intercountry adoption, closed versus open. There's a lot of issues that and people, again, don't know what they don't know. So I have a small private practice. I do telehealth. I support people all over Australia, adoptees, intercountry adoptees, as well as adoptive parents. And it's not to say that you have to be an adoptee to be able to provide support, but you need to be aware, I think, of these issues. So again, it's a privilege that I have been through the journey that I have to have the resources to be able to provide that support to people who a lot of adoptees do want to talk to somebody who has their own lived experience. Because of that trust and that need of someone who understands.
Yeah, and that's very important. I know, it's like, why it's got to be, but it's like there's just that instant trust to be able to do the work.
Yes. Yeah.
So you're doing an amazing job with your private. So what is it called? It's Empowered.
Empowered Clinical Psychology, yeah.
Awesome. And they can Google and come to you.
Yes.
Well, it's been so lovely and so amazing to have you on the podcast and just have a chat. I have a feeling we're going to have a chat again.
Sounds good. I'm in.
You're in, yeah. Thanks, everyone, for being with us. I've really enjoyed it. And, I hope next week as well we can bust a few more myths and have this open conversation. And, you can find us on Instagram and YouTube, I think, now. Awesome, thanks.
Thank you.